They fired me for standing up for a veteran and his service dog. I never thought I'd end up managing a coffee shop, but here I am, 38 years old, running Liberty Coffee, a little place just a few blocks from the biggest military base in the state. It's not some chain with cookie-cutter decor and bored teenagers behind the counter. It's been here since the 80s, back when my uncle first opened it, and even though it's changed hands a few times, the place still carries that old-school charm. The kind of place where the coffee's strong, the regulars have their own seats, and the baristas know your order before you even step up to the counter. I know every regular by name. I know what they drink, how they take their coffee, and even which pastries they pretend they're not going to order before caving 5 minutes later. I know when their kids' birthdays are, when their grandkids come into town, and who's going through a rough patch but doesn't want to talk about it. Liberty Coffee isn't just a shop, it's a community, and I take pride in that. It's the kind of place where folks actually care about each other, where a bad day can turn around with the right cup of coffee and the right conversation. I wasn't always in the coffee business. A decade ago, I was grinding away in corporate America, stuck in a gray cubicle, answering emails that didn't matter 5 minutes after they were sent. I wore a tie every day, sat through pointless meetings, and drank whatever burnt coffee came from the office pot. I had a boss who spoke almost entirely in corporate buzzwords and thought that circle back was a personality trait. And then one day, I just quit. No plan, no safety net, just the realization that if I spent another 10 years in that world, I'd probably have a heart attack before 40. So I found myself here, in a place where people actually enjoy their coffee. Where veterans gather on Wednesday mornings for Veterans Coffee Hour, swapping stories and giving each other a hard time, but always looking out for one another. Some of these guys come in because they don't have anywhere else to go. Others come in because this is the only place where they feel understood. Either way, it's one of the best things about this job. It's not just about the coffee, it's about the stories, the laughter, and the quiet understanding that some things don't need to be said out loud. And then there's the rush hours, the morning crowd of bleary-eyed service members who chug their coffee like it's jet fuel before heading to base. The midday regulars who take their time, reading newspapers and half listening to the classic rock station we keep on in the background. Then the afternoon stragglers, the ones who come in to escape the heat or kill time before picking up their kids from school. I love it. The rhythm, the familiarity, the feeling that in a world constantly changing, Liberty Coffee stays the same. But all of that changed the day the new inspector walked in. I saw him before he even reached the counter, tall, stiff posture, crisp shirt, eyes scanning the place like he was taking mental notes on every detail. He wasn't military, that much was clear, but he carried himself like someone used to being in charge. The usual health inspectors were a bit more casual, polite but rushed, like they just wanted to get in, check their boxes, and get out. This guy? He looked like he was here to start a war. The kind of guy who probably alphabetizes his socks and irons his jeans. The type who walks into a room and sucks all the joy right out of it. I could already tell he was going to be a problem. I didn't know it then, but from the moment he stepped through the door, everything about my life was about to change. The second I saw the inspector, I knew I was in for a bad day. Richard Collins. The name alone was enough to make small business owners break out in a sweat. He had a reputation, cold, meticulous, and absolutely merciless. If there was a rule buried somewhere in the fine print of the health code, Collins would find it and use it against you. Rumor had it he'd single-handedly shut down half a dozen family-run diners over the past year, all for things that most inspectors would have given a warning for. The kind of guy who probably organized his sock drawer by color and had a meltdown if someone used the wrong recycling bin. And now he was sitting in my coffee shop, a black leather folder on the table in front of him, sipping a small black coffee he hadn't paid for. I let that slide. The last thing I needed was to get on his bad side before he even started. The morning rush was still in full swing. Military guys in uniform lined up for their caffeine fix, chatting in sharp, clipped tones. A few older veterans sat in their usual spots, nursing their coffee like it was the only thing keeping them grounded. Parents wrangled sugar-hyped kids, and college students stared dead-eyed at their laptops, pretending to study while actually scrolling through their phones. The smell of fresh espresso mixed with cinnamon and vanilla, the soundtrack of clinking cups and low chatter filling the space like white noise. Then the door swung open, and just like that, the energy in the room shifted. Mick Thompson. Everyone in Liberty Coffee knew him. A former Marine, built like a brick wall, but with the kind of easygoing smile that put people at ease. The kind of guy who could make you laugh even when you were having the worst day of your life. His service dog, Ranger, trotted beside him, big, steady, all business. Ranger wasn't just any dog. He was trained to help Mick with his PTSD, sensing when the world got too loud, too bright, too much. No one questioned his presence. Not here. Mick gave me a nod as he approached the counter, like he always did, his silent way of saying, "Glad to be here." I had already reached for his usual. Large black coffee, no room, extra hot. No matter how scorching it was outside, Mick liked his coffee hot enough to strip paint off a car. As I poured, he took his usual spot near the window, where he could see the door. He never sat with his back to the entrance. Habit, he once told me. Old instincts die hard. Ranger curled up at his feet, his ears twitching as he scanned the room like a soldier on duty. A couple of regulars greeted Mick as they passed, and he nodded back, a quiet acknowledgement. But before I could hand over his cup, I noticed something shift in the corner of my eye. Collins had stopped flipping through his notes. His cold eyes locked onto Ranger. His whole body stiffened, like he'd just spotted a rat scurrying across the floor. And then, in a voice that cut through the low hum of conversation, he said it. "That dog needs to go. Now." The moment Collins barked out his demand, the entire shop went silent. Cups paused halfway to lips, conversations cut off mid-sentence, and every pair of eyes turned toward the spectacle unfolding near the counter. Even the coffee machine, usually humming along with a steady hiss of steam, seemed to take a break just to listen. Collins stood there, chest puffed up, arms crossed, with the air of someone who expected immediate compliance. It was the kind of attitude that probably worked wonders in places where people were too scared to push back. But this wasn't one of those places. I took a slow breath, forcing my expression to stay calm. This wasn't my first time dealing with someone like him, a guy who thought his clipboard gave him the power to steamroll over common sense. "Service dogs are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. "Ranger has every legal right to be here." Collins barely let me finish before he scoffed, shaking his head like I had just recited some urban legend instead of a federal law. "That only applies in certain cases. Restaurants, maybe. But a coffee shop? We'll see what the health department has to say about that." He flipped open his leather folder and started jotting down notes, his pen scratching against the paper like a blade against stone. It was obvious, he wasn't here for a routine check. He had come looking for something, and if he couldn't find it, he'd make sure to create it. Mick hadn't moved an inch, but I could see the tension in his jaw. His knuckles had turned white where his hands rested on the table. He was the kind of guy who didn't look for fights, but that didn't mean he wouldn't finish one if it came to him. Ranger, sensing his unease, shifted slightly, positioning himself just a little closer to Mick's leg. "I'll tell you what I see here," Collins continued, tapping his pen against the folder like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. "An unclean environment, a health hazard, and a blatant disregard for regulations. If you want to keep your doors open, I suggest you comply." The nerve. A few of the regulars had started whispering among themselves. The older vets at the corner table had stopped their usual banter, their eyes sharp and assessing. They'd seen their fair share of bullies in their time, and they recognized one when they saw one. "I'm not removing Ranger," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's a service dog, and he stays." Collins didn't like that answer. He made a big show of marking something down in his notes, his lips tightening like he had just bitten into something sour. "Then we'll see how long this shop lasts once my report goes through." A heavy silence followed. I wasn't naive, I knew what a bad report from him could do. Small businesses like mine didn't always have the resources to fight back. And Collins? He was the kind of guy who thrived on fear. He was betting that I'd cave, that I'd back down to protect my livelihood. But some things were bigger than that. I looked around the shop. At Mick, who had fought for a country that now seemed to be asking him to justify his existence. At the veterans who had built a second home in my cafe. At the regulars, the neighbors, the people who made Liberty Coffee what it was. I spotted old Mr. Turner in his usual booth, a Korean War vet who could tell you the best diner in every town from here to the Mississippi. Across from him was Linda, a retired Navy nurse who could still put a Marine in his place with a single look. They weren't just customers. They were family. Then there was Mick, sitting there with his hands clenched, staring at a man who had never seen a day in uniform, a man who would never understand what it was like to need a dog like Ranger. And Ranger, still as a statue, his deep brown eyes flicking back and forth between his handler and the man trying to push him out. I had a choice to make. Comply, or do what was right. I had made my decision. There was no way in hell I was kicking Mick and Ranger out of Liberty Coffee. It wasn't just about the law, it was about doing what was right. Collins knew it. The regulars knew it. And, judging by the way he clenched his jaw, Collins wasn't used to hearing the word no. But before he could launch into another lecture, the door swung open, and in walked Brian Fisher. If Collins was the guy who enjoyed making people miserable, Fisher was the guy who made sure it was all done under the guise of corporate policy. He was the kind of executive who wore overpriced suits, drove a car that cost more than my annual salary, and probably had an inspirational quote framed in his office that he didn't even believe in. Fisher didn't come in often. In fact, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen him in the shop. But I knew exactly why he was here now. News traveled fast, and someone had tipped him off that things were getting heated. He barely acknowledged anyone as he walked straight toward me and Collins, his polished dress shoes clicking against the floor. The regulars, sensing that something was about to go down, leaned in, their conversations falling silent. Even Mick sat up a little straighter, his eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold. Fisher didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ryan, I need a word. Now." I crossed my arms, already bracing myself for whatever nonsense was about to come out of his mouth. "We can talk here." His expression tightened like he didn't appreciate being challenged. "I've spoken with Mr. Collins. He tells me you're refusing to comply with his request. That's not how we do things, Ryan. We need to think about the business. We can't afford bad press." I heard a scoff from one of the regulars, probably Linda, who had a habit of calling out corporate nonsense when she saw it. Fisher ignored it and kept talking. "I understand you think you're doing the right thing, but customers come first. If this situation makes someone uncomfortable, we have to address it. I need you to apologize to Mr. Collins and ask the gentleman to remove the dog." The words hit me like a slap. It wasn't just the request, it was the absolute disregard for what this place was supposed to be. Liberty Coffee wasn't some sterile, corporate-run cafe where policies mattered more than people. It was a home for the regulars, a place where folks could feel safe, where service members weren't treated like an inconvenience. I looked at Mick. He wasn't saying anything, but the tension in his face said enough. I looked at the vets in the corner, the people who had given so much and asked for so little in return. And then I looked at Fisher, this man who had probably never struggled a day in his life, standing there expecting me to betray the very people who made this place what it was. I shook my head. No. Fisher blinked, as if he hadn't expected me to push back. Ryan, don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's already hard. You're just making it worse. Collins shifted beside him, a smug smile creeping onto his face. He was enjoying this. He wanted me to back down. He wanted to win. Fisher sighed, rubbing his temple like he was dealing with a child throwing a tantrum. Then he straightened his tie, looked me dead in the eye, and said the words that changed everything. Then you're fired. Effective immediately. For a second, no one moved. The shop was dead silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone like a heavy fog. I exhaled slowly, feeling the heat rise in my chest. But I wasn't about to beg. I reached up, untied my apron, and pulled it over my head. I folded it neatly, set it on the counter, and turned to my staff, good people who didn't deserve to be caught up in this mess. It's been an honor working with you all. Keep taking care of this place. Then I turned to Mick and clapped a hand on his shoulder. You don't go anywhere. This is still your place. Mick gave a small nod, his jaw tight. Ranger pressed against his leg, steady as ever. Finally, I turned to Fisher, who stood there watching like he had expected me to put up more of a fight. You just made a big mistake. As I walked toward the door, I noticed a few regulars shifting in their seats. Some of them looked angry. Some looked disappointed. And some just looked ready to follow me out the door. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. I had lost my job. But what came next? That was the real question. I stepped out of Liberty Coffee, the afternoon sun hitting me like a spotlight. My Ford F-150 was parked right out front, the same spot I always left it. The old truck had seen better days, but it was mine. It smelled like a mix of coffee beans and sawdust from the time I tried to fix the cup holder and made it worse. Before I could even reach for my keys, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Then it buzzed again. And again. And again. By the time I pulled it out, the screen was flooded with notifications. Texts, missed calls, a ridiculous number of social media alerts. My stomach tightened. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. The first message I opened was from my buddy, Jake. Short and to the point, dude. You're famous. We got your back. Don't back down. Below that were a few links, Facebook, TikTok, even a local news station's website. Curiosity got the best of me, and I tapped the Facebook link. There it was. The entire confrontation. Someone had recorded the whole thing. The video started with Collins barking at me about the dog, his voice sharp and demanding. Then it cut to me standing my ground, refusing to back down. The camera was steady, catching every tense moment, every shift in the room's atmosphere. The final shot? Me dropping my apron on the counter and walking out, head held high. The caption hit me like a punch to the chest, manager fired for defending veteran and service dog. We can't let this slide. And just like that, it had gone viral. I scrolled through the comments, my heart pounding. Thousands of them. Some from people I knew, but most from strangers. This man stood up for what's right. Respect. Corporate greed strikes again. This isn't over. Military bases should ban this company until they fix this. Who do we call to get this guy his job back? I leaned back in my seat, running a hand through my hair. This was unreal. Before I could process any of it, my phone rang. It was Jake. Dude, are you seeing this? His voice was practically buzzing with excitement. You're blowing up. It's everywhere. I exhaled, trying to wrap my head around it. Who even recorded this? Some military wife. She was sitting near the front. She posted it to a military spouses group, and it spread like wildfire. A bunch of vets picked it up. Then someone tagged a couple of influencers, and now, boom. You're a national headline. I stared at my phone. The numbers were still climbing. The video had already been shared over 100,000 times. It wasn't just local news anymore, it had gone way beyond that. People are pissed, Jake continued. The military community's got your back. Even some big names are talking about it. A retired general reposted it. Some politician just tweeted about it. And man, the comments are brutal for that Collins guy. I refreshed my screen. Sure enough, Collins wasn't exactly being celebrated. People were digging up his history, finding other places he had shut down, other businesses he had hurt. And Brian Fisher? His name was starting to circulate too. Another call came in, this time from my mom. Then my old high school coach. Then a number I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. I needed a second to think. I glanced back at Liberty Coffee. Through the window, I could see Mick still sitting there, Ranger at his feet, surrounded by the regulars. They were watching their phones too, seeing everything unfold in real time. A knock on my truck window startled me. I turned to see Linda, the retired Navy nurse who had a way of making even the toughest Marines sit up straight. She gestured for me to roll down the window. "You all right, kid?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "I think so," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. I didn't expect this." Linda nodded, her sharp eyes scanning my face. "You stood up for one of us. You think we're just gonna let that go?" I smiled a little, shaking my head. "Guess not." She patted the side of my truck. "Good. Now go home and get some rest. Something tells me you're gonna have a busy day tomorrow." As I watched her walk back inside, I knew she was right. This wasn't just some viral moment that would disappear in a day. This was turning into something much bigger. And the military wasn't going to let it go. An hour had passed, and I was still sitting in my old Ford F-150, staring at my phone like it might suddenly tell me what to do next. The notifications hadn't slowed down. Every time I thought they were tapering off, another wave hit. Friends, strangers, even a couple of journalists I had never heard of, all wanting to talk. Then I heard it, the unmistakable low growl of multiple engines rolling in at once. I looked up just in time to see a convoy of military SUVs pulling into the parking lot. Big, black, and no nonsense. They moved like they had a mission. The kind of arrival that made people take notice. A few regulars, still sitting outside, turned their heads. Inside, through the big front windows, I could see Collins and Fisher standing near the counter, frozen mid-conversation. The smugness that had been plastered all over their faces earlier? Gone. The first SUV came to a stop directly in front of Liberty Coffee. Doors swung open in perfect sync, and 4 Marines stepped out, moving with a precision that was impossible to miss. The kind of discipline that made people stand a little straighter when they walked by. At the front of the group was a man in his late 50s, tall and built like someone who still trained every morning at 0500. The Silver Eagle insignia on his chest made my stomach do a little flip. Colonel Daniel Harper. I recognized him instantly. He wasn't just some base officer. Harper was a legend. The kind of leader Marines talked about with a mix of fear and admiration. The type of guy who could walk into a room and command it without raising his voice. Harper and his men didn't hesitate. They walked straight into the shop without a word. I wasn't about to miss whatever was about to happen. I shoved my phone into my pocket, swung open the truck door, and followed them inside. The moment I stepped in, I could feel the shift in the air. Harper moved toward the counter like he owned the place. His men flanked him, their faces unreadable. The room, which had been buzzing with whispered conversations just minutes ago, was now completely silent. Collins looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Fisher was stiff as a board, his face pale. The two of them had been so comfortable throwing their weight around when it was just a barista and a few customers. Now they looked like they were rethinking their life choices. Mick was still sitting at his usual table, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Ranger, sensing the shift in energy, stayed close, his dark eyes locked on the newcomers. One of the Marines gave Mick a nod, a silent acknowledgement. Harper stopped just shy of the counter, set his hands behind his back, and surveyed the room with the kind of gaze that probably made recruits forget their own names. Then, in a voice that was calm but left no room for argument, he spoke. "We need to talk." The weight of those words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to breathe too loud. The entire shop was locked in that moment, waiting for what came next. And just like that, I knew, whatever was about to happen next was going to be big. The silence stretched so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Colonel Harper stood at the center of the shop, his presence alone enough to command absolute attention. Collins was frozen near the counter, looking like he was trying to blend into the background. Fisher? He was stiff, the kind of stiff that usually meant someone knew they were about to have a very bad day. Harper's voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it, the kind that let you know he was done tolerating nonsense. "I've seen the footage," he said. "And let me be clear, this is unacceptable." Mick shifted slightly at his table, his arms crossed over his chest, waiting. Ranger was as still as ever, but his ears twitched like he could sense the tension rising. The regulars who had stayed to watch this all unfold weren't even pretending to sip their coffee anymore. They were locked in. Harper didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, dialed, and walked a few paces away, his voice low but firm. No one dared to move. Collins, who had been standing awkwardly, glancing between Harper and Fisher, suddenly stiffened as his own phone buzzed. He hesitated before pulling it out, but the second he read whatever was on the screen, his entire face drained of color. His grip on the phone tightened like he was bracing himself for impact. He swallowed hard, turned on his heel, and without a word, walked straight out of the shop. Not a glance back, not an argument, nothing. Just out the door and into the parking lot, disappearing like he was late for a flight out of the country. I blinked. That was fast. Fisher, on the other hand, still had to face the music. And judging by the way he kept shifting from one foot to the other, he knew it. Then his phone rang. He flinched like he already knew what was coming, but he answered anyway. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice tight. "I understand." "No, sir, yes. Yes, of course." The more he listened, the worse he looked. His hand was gripping the counter so hard his knuckles had turned white. Finally, after what felt like forever, he hung up, cleared his throat, and turned toward me. His expression was pure defeat. He stepped forward, his usual corporate bravado stripped away. "Ryan," he said, his voice lower than before, a little unsteady. He swallowed, tried again. "I owe you an apology. And," he turned to Mick. "You, as well. What happened today was unacceptable." The words came out like they had been dragged through broken glass. Like he was being forced to apologize at gunpoint, and his entire career depended on it. I folded my arms. "That so?" He nodded, rubbing his temple. "Yes." And, he exhaled sharply. "The company will be making this right." Mick raised an eyebrow. "That right?" Another stiff nod. "Yes." The regulars didn't even try to hide their amusement. Linda, the retired Navy nurse, snorted into her coffee. Someone near the back muttered, "About time." Harper finally stepped back toward us, looking satisfied. "We take care of our own," he said simply. "And we don't let people like this get away with it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Because in that moment, I knew it. This had mattered. I wasn't just some guy who lost his job over a service dog. I wasn't just another small-town manager up against corporate suits. I had stood for something. And for once, the right people had listened. The shop started to buzz again, the tension breaking as regulars exchanged glances and murmurs. A few even clapped. Mick leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied. Ranger finally relaxed, resting his chin on Mick's boot. Then Linda, always one to break a moment, raised her coffee cup toward me. "So, Ryan," she said, loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "You gonna open your own place now, or are we all just gonna have to riot?" The laughter that followed felt like the final nail in Fisher's corporate coffin. The next morning, I woke up still trying to process everything that had happened. My phone was still buzzing with messages, people checking in, congratulating me, asking what I was going to do next. I didn't have an answer. Then came the message from Colonel Harper. Short, to the point, lunch. Officers' Club. Noon. Be there. Well, that didn't sound like a request. By the time I pulled up outside the Officers' Club on base, I had convinced myself this was going to be some kind of polite military-style apology, a handshake, a pat on the back, and a speech about how they appreciated what I did. What I wasn't expecting was to be led to a private dining room where Harper was already seated, looking relaxed but serious. A waiter in crisp whites set down 2 plates before I even had a chance to sit. Steak, mashed potatoes, green beans. The kind of meal that said, "We mean business." Harper didn't waste time with small talk. He cut into his steak like a man used to making big decisions over dinner. "You ever thought about working with veterans full-time?" I blinked. "What?" He set his knife and fork down with precision. "We're opening a new veteran support center. Job training, mental health services, financial planning, the works. We need someone who understands people, who knows how to build a community. Someone like you." I stared at him, sure I had misheard. "Me?" "You," Harper said, chewing methodically, like he had all the time in the world. "You built Liberty Coffee into a place where veterans felt at home. That's not an accident. That's leadership." I laughed, mostly out of disbelief. "Colonel, I ran a coffee shop." "And you turned it into more than that," he said, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin. "Think about it. How many vets walked into your place because they felt like they belonged? How many people came not just for the coffee, but because they knew it was a place where they weren't just another number?" He wasn't wrong. Liberty Coffee had become more than just a business, it had been a second home for a lot of people. Myself included. "Look," Harper continued, reading my hesitation. "I get it. This wasn't on your radar. But we need someone who's got the guts to stand up when it counts. That video going viral? That wasn't luck. That was people recognizing a leader when they saw one." I rubbed the back of my neck, letting his words sink in. What exactly would I be doing? Running the place. Setting the culture. Hiring the right people. Making sure it's what veterans actually need, not what some suits think they need. He leaned back. "You think about how many vets walk into Liberty Coffee because it feels like a safe place. Now imagine if they had somewhere built specifically for them." That hit differently. I thought about Mick, about Linda, about the guys who showed up every week just to have a place where they belonged. "You wouldn't be doing it alone," Harper added. "We've got funding. We've got backing. But we need someone at the wheel who gets it." I exhaled, staring at my plate but not really seeing it anymore. My brain was running in a dozen directions at once. Harper gave me a knowing look. Take the weekend, he said, standing up. Think it over. But I think you already know your answer. I watched him walk out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a plate of rapidly cooling food. For the first time since I lost my job, I had something I hadn't felt in a long time. A real choice. And that scared me more than I expected. Making big decisions had never been my strong suit, but something about this one felt different. Harper had given me time to think, but deep down, I already knew my answer. The truth was, I had spent years building something special at Liberty Coffee, creating a place where people felt like they belonged. Maybe this was just the next step. So, the next morning, I called Harper. I'm in. And just like that, everything changed. The transition wasn't smooth. Turns out, turning a viral moment into something real takes more than just good intentions. But Harper had connections, and I had determination. We started with a single location, part cafe, part resource center. A place where vets could grab a coffee, take a breath, and figure out their next move. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. The first shop had an old jukebox in the corner that only played classic rock, mismatched chairs that had probably seen better days, and a coffee machine that needed a good kick now and then. But none of that mattered. The place felt like home. Then we expanded. Slowly, carefully, but with purpose. One shop turned into 3, then 5. Each one run by veterans, for veterans. The idea was simple: give them a place to work, a place to reconnect, a place to feel like they weren't just another statistic. Mick was one of the first to sign on. The guy had spent years struggling to find a steady job after getting out, bouncing between gigs that never really felt right. But this gave him purpose. He took to it like he had been doing it his whole life. Watching him behind the counter, joking with customers, training new hires, it felt right. Like we were actually making a difference. And it wasn't just Mick. Guys who had spent years feeling lost suddenly had structure again. Some moved on to new careers. Others stayed, building something bigger than any of us had imagined. A few guys from the first location even started their own businesses. One opened a barbershop next door, another started a landscaping company and hired other vets who needed work. A year passed in a blink. One afternoon, I found myself back in front of Liberty Coffee. The place where it all started. But it looked different now. The community had taken over ownership after Fisher and his corporate overlords decided it wasn't worth the bad press. Now it belonged to the people who loved it most. Walking inside, it felt the same, but better. The regulars were still there, Linda with her usual sharp wit, the old vets swapping the same stories they'd told 1,000 times before. Even the smell was the same, that perfect mix of fresh coffee and warm pastries. Then I saw it, the sign on the wall. A simple wooden plaque with bold, carved letters. Protecting each other, that's what real Americans do. I smiled. That day, losing my job had felt like the worst thing that could happen. Now, standing there, looking around at everything that had come from it, I knew the truth. It had been the best thing. And as I sat down with my coffee, surrounded by friends, I couldn't help but wonder, what would someone else have done in my place? Maybe it didn't matter. Because in the end, I knew I had done the right thing. And that made all the difference.